Welcome to the Lord Mayor's meeting room. This is a very, very busy room, and it's where we host many meetings, a lot of pre-council meetings, a lot of business is done in here, and we also have meetings with visiting dignitaries and functional meetings for city business. Behind me here on this wall we have black and white photographs of past Lord Mayors dating back to 1900, right up to 1997. And the corridor outside, we have all the coloured photographs of the most recent 24 Lord Mayors. And every year, as a Lord Mayor is elected, the oldest colour photograph is transferred to black and white and is placed here on this, let's call it the Wall of Fame or the Wall of Shame, whatever you want to call it. But Lord Mayors dating back to 1900. There's a lot of history attached to this wall and very interesting. Many visitors to this room comment on the many Lord Mayors in the past, and they comment on, they remember a Lord Mayor from 1964 or 1974, etc. And it's a wall that is very of interest to so many visitors coming in here to the Lord Mayor's meeting room. As I said, since coming in here in last June, I have, with the help of Dan from the museum, transformed the art in this room to signify the very important association with meetings, coupled with the history and the commemoration and where we came from. Because after all, if we don't know where we came from, we don't know where we're going. There's a very interesting portrait over here of Jenny Dowdall, who was the very first Lady Mayor in our city. And she was quite significant, and she made a huge contribution to the city and indeed to the Lord Mayor's office when she purchased quite a bit of the furniture. Some of it is still sitting inside there. Also paid for the carpet out of her own pocket, and she was a very, very famous Lord Mayor in the past. The many other artworks here, I'll defer to my colleague, Dan Breen, but before I do so, this room wasn't always the meeting room for the Lord Mayor pre-council. It also had other uses in more recent years, and I'll ask my colleague Jim Corr to comment on that.
Yeah. Yes, indeed, Lord Mayor. This was the city manager's office when I became a member in 1973, and for the best part of 20 years we had numerous meetings here with officials, councillors meeting officials, and indeed members of the public arriving here to discuss various matters. And we sometimes in Cork don't appreciate the fact that there has been a wonderful working relationship between the people of Cork and Cork City Council. And one of those, for example, is the commitment to the cultural life of our city. And the people of Cork had a huge interest in culture and a great diversity of culture. And for example, about 1954 or 55, the Choral Festival was established. And choral groups from all over Europe came to Cork for that particular week. But a number of them coming from socialist and Russian areas of Europe. Quite a number of them just drove themselves to Cork, and then they had to be put up and looked after. And workers from the citizens of Cork housed them and fed them, and they came in here and they took part in this cultural activity for a week. And I thought that we sometimes must acknowledge the huge contribution that the man in the street has made to the cultural life of our city. And that is something we can never forget. But all sorts of groups, Lord Mayor, would come here and sit down and have discussions with us. And the City Council would then work out in what ways we could provide money for them. Because while we were, for example, very involved in building roads, as I said, and houses and various things like that, we also contributed to various aspects of our society which needed help.
Thank you, Jim. And in order to comment on all the various art pieces and the pieces of photography, significant pieces of photography contributed and picked out and selected for me by Dan Breen. Can I ask Dan to comment on some of the photography we have here in the Lord Mayor's meeting room?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll start with the very large image of the council chamber on January the 30th, 1920, which was when Lord Mayor, or Tomás McCurtain, was elected Lord Mayor. To give it some context, the general election of 1918 had been a resounding electoral success for Sinn Féin. So the local municipal elections that they were hosting, that were happening on January the 15th, 1920, Sinn Féin poured all their energy and effort into that. They used the Cumann na mBan and the local IRA and volunteer units to help with canvassing. On that particular election, Sinn Féin and the Transport Union and Workers in Transport Union ran a joint ticket, and they successfully won 30 out of the 56 seats. So on that night, it was the first Republican council that met, and they duly elected Tomás McCurtain. Almost immediately, Tomás McCurtain stood up and proposed a motion that the City Hall or Cork Corporation would recognise the authority of the Doyle, which was duly passed. He also refused to take a pay raise. It was suggested that his annual salary would go from £600 to £1,000. He refused that and instead settled for £500. McCurtain also, a couple of weeks later, reinstated or revived the old tradition of appointing a chaplain for the Lord Mayor, and at which he appointed Father Dominic from the Franciscan Order. McCurtain was recognised as a very amenable Lord Mayor, willing to work with all sides of the political divide. And one of his first duties and important duties that he performed prior to his murder was the setting up of a committee to look at living conditions and higher wages for the workers of Cork. And I think if he had survived, I think Cork may have undergone many social and cultural changes for the better. Over here is a very interesting photograph taken a year later, or maybe 6 or so months after the events of 1920, when you have the Sinn Féin councillors gather together for a group photograph with their Lord Mayor, Doyle Courts. Again, in the space of 3 or 4 years, Sinn Féin had moved from a relatively unknown political entity to the dominant political party in Ireland, both at national and local levels. Another interesting photograph taken in 1920 shows what we call the Doyle Courts. At the time when the revolution was underway in 1920, there was efforts by Sinn Féin to run a shadow legal system in conjunction and often opposed to the British legal system. And one of those was the Sinn Féin courts, or the Doyle Courts. And these were held in the old City Hall building. And this photograph shows one of those court sessions that is being led by Doyle Courts. In the corner, with the help of the Lord Mayor, we selected 12 images from the Cork Public Museum's image collection. All of these images date from roughly 1860 up to about 1900, 1910. And they show significant developments of the city and the landscape, the change of the city, and also show places or buildings that no longer exist. So, for example, there's a superb image of Patrick's Bridge being built in 1859, 1860. We see lovely images of the Coal Quay, or the Irish Market, bustling, busier than I've ever seen it, but this is again at the start of the 20th century, showing the importance of that market. There's a wonderful image of the previous St. Finbarr's Cathedral that was knocked in the 1860s, that was demolished to make way for the present St. Finbarr's Cathedral. And there's also a lovely image of Sunday's Well, showing the actual holy well that used to be in position there, that dates back to roughly 1644, but that was knocked down and covered over in 1946. And all that you'd find there is a plaque on the wall noting the spot of the Sunday as well. Interestingly enough, archaeological excavations there in 1946 in Sunday as well found middens or rubbish heaps of animal bones, oyster shells, and it seems to signify that people had been travelling to that site for well over many hundred years, but not just for its holy properties, but also for very practical use for cooking and for a water supply, when it would have been easier, it would have been easier to get the water from the well there rather than travelling further into the city. And that's just a selection of some of the items that are on display here and some of the photographs, but it does go to show of the vast and diverse and interesting collection of images we have at Cork Public Museum, many of them purchased and cared for with support from the Cork City Council.